who were influenced by Louis Mumford, will want to do what I would call a Pritzker inclusion ceremony. And it would be very modest, and it would not travel far and be in a lavish hotel and have heads of state and all of these things. But it would be something that began to set a new way of thinking of how prizes should be awarded and what for. I want to talk first of all to students here and to say when I was a student I felt very lost, and I used to say I need a structure, I need an intellectual structure which I thought was just not there. I was not learning in a way that I could perceive some kind of pattern or plan. So I left a country where there was uproar at my university. My university was one of the great universities for standing against apartheid. Much more than, say, the Nazi university. It went under immediately. But I left and I went to England, and there was another uproar, a socialist government. And now it was not the question of apartheid or the monopoly of a colonial master. By the way, the argument about Spanish words or Mexican words, I was against Christina because I'm a colonial. So I was saying, we have our right to our own words. But then they were in uproar there, and America was so orderly, and it was the 1950s, and everyone was prim and they wore white socks. And then suddenly, there were the 60s, and everyone was in revolt there, and I felt rather at home. But that feeling of being lost, I told my advisor, I was lacking structure in my life, and this was Arthur Horn, a German refugee, and many, many refugees around my childhood and upbringing and growth. And so he was my student advisor, and we used to have coffee together once a week. And I used to talk about a need for structure in my life, and he used to talk about the November group. And I think our conversations went by in parallel, and probably did both of us a lot of good. But now, as I was putting together Having Words and writing the pieces around it, I began to see that there had been a huge coherence in defining problems in a certain way in Africa, in seeing the same problems dealt with in another way in England, and defined, but not approached for the solving. Peter Smithson said, you couldn't really work with sociologists, and you couldn't define an active socioplastics, and he gave up. Then I got to Penn, and there were people like Herbert Gans, sociologists in a planning school, and fighting everyone around him. But I began to see there were methods, and there were ways of approach and ways of thinking. It didn't mean the problem wasn't still almost unsolvable, but you could begin to find the ways to approach it. And that was where I began to see the coherence. And then I taught and took the methods I had learned in all these places and expanded them into ways of learning from environments. And in the end, my main theme was that there are ways of thinking in urbanism, there are ways of thinking in sociology, in regional science, that if architects only knew them, they would be much better architects. And I was always saying, we're not going to be little sociologists, we're not going to be economists, but we do need to know economic thinking, and we do need to apply it in ways to do with the things we do. And that is what I've tried to do. So I am an architect and a planner, but most of my life I have done architectural work and taken thought from planning to make architecture in a way more responsible, but also in another way more beautiful. Can do both things. We have always in our office had this thing that no one should be able to afford, and we couldn't afford, but we did it anyway, a little university, tucked in there in the office. And so we were doing academic work and doing things like learning from Las Vegas while we were teaching, as part of our teaching. And now that our office is being transferred to new owners, and we are just on our own. We still have a mini university tucked away there in our house. Christina is there. She comes up from New York and she stays up in our attic and she has her computer set up there and we look at slides there. So we're still, I think, heaven for a retired elderly person is doing the kind of academic professional work that we have always done. We are into professional education, not academic education. There is a difference. You learn for recommending policy, you learn for doing, you learn by doing, for doing. And that is very much what I spent my life doing. Now this book tracks that. I never had time to write very much, so my letters are from a war, from the front line. They're brief, my essays, they're brief, they're concentrated. They result from having had a big fight with Paul Davidoff, and then I wrote an essay called Analysis and Design. And it tells economists that they are not only analysts, they are also designers. And they lose half their profession if they don't realize that they are involved in design. And their designs will be very poor designs, but they will be designs and they will be used. So that the holistic thinking that architects are trained to do belongs in many other fields. So that was one kind of area that I dealt with in the book. Another one was on pop art and popular culture, and you find that there. Another, in the 60s, there's a lot of debate on what's American about American architecture. So I start mine with being an African and talking about resenting as a child. Resenting as a child the people from England who told us what was the right thing to do. Like Christina. Christina's wonderful. She's telling Mexicans what's the right Spanish. And so they were saying the landscape in Johannesburg, around Johannesburg, was very dull. It's the veldt, I mean the veldt. The veldt is very beautiful. But they would say, if you just look at this little piece right here, it could almost be Surrey. And I would say, why does it have to be Surrey to be beautiful? And so from an age of about 9, I was a xenophobe. I was someone who was looking at my own landscape. So I say I have an African view of Las Vegas. So you see that growing in these articles. Something else is, I wrote, there's an article called Planning the Powder Room. That's in part, I was very angry for not getting tenure, and so I was going to write about anything. So I wrote that all in one day to begin to have a record, but it's an angry article about feminism. And it also spoofs the people in regional science who I admire and really base a lot of my work on. But it spoofs their need to make everything in numbers. And it does an imitation mathematical formulae for calculating the length of the towel rail that you need in a ladies' toilet. Others, I have words about Philip Johnson, or about people like Ed Bacon, or even on occasion about Lou Kahn. And I also give accounts of people that I admire, like Peter Smithson and Robert Venturi. Then I'm also, at the end, I wrote an article about words in architecture, but always trying to maintain that I love words, I love designing, I love mapping in order to analyze and thinking theoretically and making things. And all of these have been from my childhood and have gone in parallel for me, and together with enormous feelings of morality in architecture. And I'm a functionalist, and I'm not anti-modern. I'm, through postmodernism of my own kind, making one of the updates of modernism. I think ours was about the 4th update of modernism, and the youngest generation now who are looking back to us are doing a 5th update, and I'm trying to say to them, take our ideas, and for heaven's sake, make them global, make them applicable to you, make them applicable to your computerized world. And very good luck to you. I can't follow you, but I wish you very good luck. And I think it's going to end there.
Thank you very much. Y con estas palabras pasemos arriba a brindar y a celebrar este primer libro en español y la suerte de poderlo presentar aquí con Denise en México.